You, Soraka leaned forward. What's your vocation? No. The human male fled with a shriek. It was a flight that only lasted up to the bars of his cage. The entire thing shuddered as he knocked himself out. I guess we won't be able to speak properly in this sort of environment. Having Mitra do the talking was an option, but that would probably lead to hours of curious, and annoying, questions by KHHSCHLR. The guru peered down at the unconscious human, who was lying in an expanding pool of his own excrement. This one appears to be defective, the guru said. Still, I assure you that he's still perfectly edible. Soraka wordlessly turned away from the line of cages and their quivering human occupants. All of them were pressed against the furthest corners of their prisons, trying to stay as far away from him as possible. Is there some location where the humans are less panicky? He asked. We would have to leave the city for that, KHHSCHLR answered. Are you sure you don't want to take another look around? That can wait until later. Let's focus on one thing at a time. Very well, one moment while I arrange for an escort. I already have an escort. KHHSCHLR eyed him silently for a moment before turning to walk out of the market. Eastwatch and the settlements along the Rolengork had been emptied of humans. Whether they had been claimed as slaves or worked for the Beastman tribes in some other way wasn't clear, but the officials made it sound as if they had been purposely moved away from the river's vicinity to prevent any incidents from happening. At least that was how it sounded to him, and there was probably some truth to it. The feral nature of Rolengork's beastmen was bound to generate all sorts of problems if thousands of migrants crossed random humans on the road. The implications presented by the silent workshops and empty guild houses that they passed since going through Eastwatch changed for the worse the moment he saw the caged humans in the market. Subjective values aside, Ranadratha's occupational policy was horrifically wasteful and Soraka couldn't figure out why they had chosen to do things the way that they did. His gaze went to the guru in front of him, whose striped tail twitched back and forth in a self-satisfied way as they went along. Out of curiosity, Soraka asked, why do you refer to yourself as a guru? Because that's what I am? KHHSCHLR answered, I've been together with Ranadratha since we were cubs. The conquest of the Draconic Kingdom is as much my dream as it is his. He handled the military end of things while I helped figure out everything else. Once he took over as the Lord of Clan Taraka, we started putting our plans into action. He and I didn't always see eye to eye on various issues, but, well, here we are. What was Rolengork's relationship with the Draconic Kingdom before you started your conquest? I've spoken with several of the Eastern Lords, but they don't offer much in the way of details. It was much like the relationship with our other neighbors, the guru replied. The other parts of Rolengork don't consider the western region to be as challenging, which led to us being looked down upon. Even though humans can be quite powerful, we had to work very hard to receive any sort of recognition. They are certainly more organized than any of our other enemies. As he understood it, the Draconic Kingdom never attacked Rolengork. The odd history of the region suggested that something beyond being a neighbor to raid lay behind the two sides' relationship. To those in the present day, however, it was just something that always was. Also, regardless of race, border lords tended towards a sort of pragmatic antagonism against outsiders, so that didn't help with the situation either. Your progress seems to suggest otherwise, Soraka noted. I believe that if any notable battles occurred, your criers would have announced it as a great victory to inspire the masses back at home. Yes, well, for months now, we had doubts about whether the humans were truly spent or not. From what we've seen in the past, their defenses are layered. They have patrols that regularly clash with tribal warbands throughout the year, but they're merely a fragile shell that acts to blunt our raids. Their strongest defenders don't come out until their cities fall under threat. A few times, they appeared after their cities fell. Ranasaj had mentioned something to that effect. It was a common strategy for not just humans, but any race that had to deal with regular raids from powerful neighbors. Making an entire border impregnable was practically impossible, so the priorities of national defense revolved around defending a state's industrial and economic cause. Those dwelling on the fringes of such a nation were essentially a buffer against any major damage to the state. It was a cold and calculating way to go about doing things, but it was essential to survival when other avenues of diplomacy were not an option. It's a pragmatic strategy when one's borders are impossible to secure, Soraka said. Where do your doubts come in? They never showed up, KHHSCHLR shrugged. We expected to face extraordinarily stiff resistance after a city or two, but it didn't happen. There was harassment by a few strong individuals at most. The entire country simply fell as we advanced. The common consensus now is that we overestimated their defensive strength and overwhelmed them with a real offensive. Overkill, so to speak. Was that possible? He could see them slowly wearing down a defending army with their never-ending stream of migrants, but it wasn't something that should have happened so quickly. Assuming that those defenders never showed up, it was more likely that they had been lost in some other conflict. Do you know how large the Draconic Kingdom is? The Rolengork runs an additional 300 kilometers from Eastwatch to the coast. Human settlement has reached the coast beyond the mountains you see on the horizon to the south. The coast there is about 100 kilometers from us. From the mouth of the Rolengork, the coastline runs another 300 kilometers northwest. Near the end of that is an uninhabited grassland next to an undead-infested wasteland. We assume that that's the full extent of the Draconic Kingdom. Soraka's eyes narrowed at the last part of KHHSCHLR's description. There's a negative energy zone here? How large is it? Is it persistent? I'm not sure. KHHSCHLR replied, we've never seen the like before, but the undead encountered there are weak enough. Zombies and skeletons and such. I advised the clans moving into the area to hire one of the mercenary groups that came with us for security just in case. Do you know who they hired? A contingent from Clan Kira. We receive reports on occasion, but nothing out of the ordinary has happened. It looked like Goro ended up about as far away as he could be from Rolengork, but they would probably end up seeing him anyway. Since a negative energy zone had been identified there, Karavaki would want to catalogue it for the Confederacy's archives. They left the city out of its southern gate, walking up a paved highway that followed a small river valley. As with the lands along the Rolengork, both sides of the river were transformed into agricultural lands as far as the eye could see. The country roads created a network connecting the villages that dotted the slopes 2 to 3 kilometers apart from one another, and towns were built after every third village or so. It was a layout that he could easily make sense of, defining the logistical standards, and thus the limitations, of the civilization that rose in the area. The way that this land has been developed doesn't lend well to habitation by at least half of your Confederation's member races, Soraka noted. How are you addressing that? Our migrants mostly settle outside of the human towns and villages, KHHSCHLR replied. What you saw on the way from Eastwatch was the exception to the rule. People usually live in the copses you see near every human community. So you know what copses are, Davy said. We've used them for generations, the guru said, but we didn't know what the humans called them until recently. In the past, we saw them as convenient groves for our raiding parties to shelter in, now they're homes for migrants. The humans complained when the tribes occupied them. Those complaints didn't last for long, as you might imagine. Soraka imagined that they wouldn't. Since tribal chieftains were what amounted to the local administration, complaining to them was the same as demanding that they vacate their new homes. As a conquered people, the humans would have no say in anything. He examined the state of one of the copses as they made their way by. The stands of trees were a sort of crop that humans rotated through from year to year. The one he was looking at was already showing signs of neglect and had started to grow wild. So the humans aren't allowed to harvest wood? He asked. Not at first, KHHSCHLR answered. It took a while to figure out the appropriate balance. Also, the Draconic Kingdom's warrior castes were still fighting us back then, so our migrants needed somewhere to stay while we dealt with them. I see. So what is the appropriate balance that you've determined? It's nothing ingenious, the guru said. We simply ensured that each tribe had enough land to sustain itself. Many have plenty of experience herding nug, and that experience can easily be applied to humans. They arrived at a crossroads a few kilometers from the city and KHHSCHLR turned inland, ascending the gentle valley slope. It wasn't long until they saw their first set of humans that weren't in cages. They were all males tending to their crops, garbed in simple fabrics. Each had a bright yellow armband with clear markings, which he assumed identified them according to some system. Soraka furrowed his brow at an odd detail as they went past several more teams of humans. With her eye for efficiency, Davy of course also noted what he did. These humans are pruning vineyards with their bare fingers, she said. They're plowing their fields by hand with sticks. Yes, very convenient, isn't it? KHHSCHLR remarked. The humans feed, shelter and clothe themselves. What I meant was that they can produce metal tools, Davy told her. Why aren't they using them? You mentioned that you're not exporting any tools that you find because they're limited. Why not have the humans make more? These humans aren't importing their metalwork from elsewhere, are they? No, we saw smithies in every town on the way here. KHHSCHLR resumed walking, speaking in low tones. Because it's dangerous, she said. They may look harmless right now, but these humans are very rebellious. If you let them craft tools, they'll make weapons if they can get away with it. Even when they don't have weapons, they will resort to using implements meant for labor. A hammer, a sickle. As a result, we must deny them the means of production. Soraka sighed and scratched the back of his neck. One might say that a recently conquered population undergoing forced acclimation to new systems had every reason to rebel, but humanoids tended to take heedless, unnecessary risks. In many ways, they were more like insectoids than beastmen, except they were most often driven by selfish motives. It was one of the main reasons why humanoid species were seen as problematic by the rest of the world. They were barely stronger than goblins, yet they acted as if they were trolls. In that case, Soraka asked, do you have ongoing issues with human resistance? We do, KHHSCHLR replied gravely. Much of the human population fled into the mountains in the south. The Khan tribes are hunting them down, but the humans have prepared well. They have countless caves and strongholds stocked with weapons and supplies, and the fighting is fierce. If Clan Torika was relying on civilian tribes to fight those humans, they would have a major problem on their hands. Humans were renowned for how they could become anything with relative ease, and farmers fighting desperately in the mountains could rapidly transform into rangers capable of turning tribes of the civilian castes. Since the Draconic Kingdom had a proper military, he imagined that their warrior caste was nowhere near done yet. Hundreds of thousands of farmers could become hundreds of thousands of soldiers. By the time Clan Torika realized that the raided had become the raiders, the humans would be ready to launch their counteroffensive. They left the road to go to a copse inhabited by a Bar tribe. A female lord was just outside of it, speaking to several mystics. They turned to greet KHHSCHLR as she came close. KHHSCHLR, the chieftain said. Welcome. What brings you here today? We have some guests from afar, KHHSCHLR replied. They're curious about how the tribes are faring in this new land. This is Grakla, the local lord. Grakla, did I ever get your name? Davy stepped forward, gesturing towards Soraka. This is Soraka. My name is Davy. I'm a merchant authorized to negotiate on my clan's behalf. Ahaha, look at Grakla perk up. Davy's such a meanie. The notion that her tribe might be able to secure a trading partner understandably piqued Grakla's interest. Soraka glanced at KHHSCHLR, but the guru seemed content to observe them. You're interested in humans? Grakla asked. Among other things, Davy answered. Do you import any goods from upriver? Food, mostly. It will be some time before our herds grow large enough to live off of, never mind export. We appreciate your interest, however. May we take a look at your operations? I'd like to develop a sense of fair value for your goods. Of course. I can't show you everything in a day, but the nearby village should provide a good idea of how things work. They returned to the road and went the rest of the way to the village. The few visible humans in the settlement made themselves scarce long before they arrived, retreating into their timber-framed homes. This village currently has 200 humans, Grakla said. Our tribe has 10 villages in its territory. How many members does your tribe have? 100. KHHSCHLR kindly worked with us to determine how large we should be to start. 2,000 humans for 100 bar. The numbers didn't add up. An adult bar civilian went through about 2 adult humans worth of meat in a month. A tribe of 100 would go through 2,400 human adults in a year. So you're importing meat from upriver to supplement your dietary needs for the time being, Davy said. How are you paying for it, if you don't mind my asking? We have our plunder from the conquest, Grakla replied. Much of it ends up in the markets across the Great Loot. We have enough to import preserved meat from home for decades at current prices. Soraka tried catching a glimpse of the humans in their homes, but every window was shuttered fast. The yards and village lanes looked pitifully bare, especially since he could see where many of the humans' belongings once were. The only signs of life were the wisps of wood smoke curling up from the chimneys of each building. "Have you considered other exports?" Davy asked. "The livestock that the humans have been raising, for instance. Or maybe fodder for the Nug in Rolengork?" "Yes, in fact," Grakla answered. "Our merchants have identified several types of wine. Human liquor is poisonous to us, but it sells well in the Great Loot. It's an unexpected bonus and we're working hard to restore production." "In that case, what about other human industries? I understand that it's still early and you're learning as you go, but the industrial capacity of the Draconic Kingdom is grossly underutilized. Rolengork would stand to gain much from it." The tribal chieftain took a deep breath, sighing as she stared at the ground. "That's a tempting line to cross," she said, "but these humans can and will turn anything into a weapon. Even letting them make barrel rings for wine storage is dangerous. My husband was lenient with them. He had the same thoughts that you had, so he let the humans make pruning shears to speed up their work. Then a gang of them stabbed him to death with those same shears while he was watching them out in the vineyards." "You have our condolences for your loss." Davy lowered her head. "I've broached a sensitive topic." "No, it's fine," Grakla said. "It's the humans that are at fault. They can't be trusted beyond our ability to keep them under control because they do whatever they think they can get away with." "On that note," Soraka said, "the ratio of humans to beastmen is already very high, yet you mentioned that you'll be increasing the population even further. How will you keep incidents like that from recurring?" "The warrior clans will be taking care of domestic security," KHHSCHLR said. "One of the major advantages of this land is that we have no tribes on the frontier to deal with. Our warriors can dedicate their time and skills both to policing duties and ensuring that standards of safety are maintained. A portion of each tribe's production will go towards sustaining that effort." It appeared that a basic system of land tax was developing in the Draconic Kingdom. Rolengork already had tolls for infrastructure usage and a simple system of tribal tribute, but now that was being adopted for the industries developing under Clan Torika's auspices. "In that case," Davy said, "I wish you the best in your efforts. We'll have to see how you're doing in. How long will it take before you believe you'll be ready to export humans?" "A bit over a decade for a regular supply," Grakla replied. "We'll sell a few before then as luxury food items, of course." "Do humans mature that quickly?" Grakla looked at KHHSCHLR. The guru cleared her throat. "Our observations over the past few decades have determined that humans reach breeding age at 12 or 13 years of age. It's also best to eat them before the age of 30. This is perfect, as they are a race that requires parental care while immature. A female can give birth approximately once a year and they grow their own food, so you can see that they can be bred prodigiously. So one, breeding pair will produce close to 20 offspring before you slaughter them?" "Pair? No, they're just like Nug, yes? You can have one stud for every 40 or 50 females. To minimize inbreeding, a tribe can trade studs with other tribes around the country." "I wonder if they can advertise? Come to the Draconic Kingdom, where every man has a harem. Travel opportunities included." Soraka glanced at Mitra. Humans did have harems in many countries around the world, but he was fairly certain that not many came in this form. "It is our hope that we can breed the undesirable qualities out of our stock in a few generations," KHHSCHLR said. "Once that happens, we'll revisit how human industries can contribute to our economy. The borders of these lands are secure on all sides, so our task is to lay a foundation upon which our civilization can flourish. All of the migrants here are burdened with the destiny of our nation." Grakla nodded in firm agreement with the guru. Soraka glanced at Shork, who had been quietly following them as they discussed how the Draconic Kingdom was being managed. He hoped she wouldn't get any strange ideas. Once they finished looking around at her tribe's operations, Grakla offered them a late afternoon meal. Soraka declined as he didn't wish to burden her tribe. On the way back to the city, a conlord with a half-dozen warriors jogged up to them from behind. Rana Chawe, KHHSCHLR nodded in greeting. "How are things going in the south?" "Slow," Rana Chawe replied. Those human lords were facing our tough opponents. It doesn't help that over 90% of our forces aren't warriors.
Who are these guests?
The name's Soraka.
We're here on personal business.
Does what's going on in the south threaten our dealings here?
Hardly, Rana Chawi scoffed. It's just the sheer number of them that have holed up in the mountains.
Our warriors can't be everywhere and the humans aren't nice enough to wait for us to get to them.
It's not dissimilar to the fighting on the southern frontier, however, so it's ultimately a matter of time.
Soraka nodded at his words.
Rana Chawi was no slouch. He was stronger than Rana Saj, but weaker than the members of Soraka's house guard. On his own, he was probably sufficient to deal with thousands of human warriors at once, so as long as the tribes under him could keep the resistance forces pinned, he could go around eliminating one group after another.
How about the pass? KHHSCHLR asked.
It's still not safe enough to use, Rana Chawi answered. The city is still under siege, as well.
I see.
I thought you said the human armies were long broken, Soraka said.
This city is one we discovered only 2 months ago, KHHSCHLR replied. It's a harbor that will provide better access to Stormport, so we're trying to capture everything intact. Our current route through Rolengork and the Great Loot takes months.
A sea route should only take weeks.
Was there any sign of the humans conducting trade with Stormport?
We know that they conduct trade along their western coast, so I don't see why they wouldn't. Who knows, there may be other ports between here and there to conduct business in. He wasn't so sure that was the case.
Stormport was considered the western terminus of the Cerulean Way and there was likely a good reason for that. It probably had something to do with the mysterious number of Red Dragon products that were sold there.
Well, if something does happen, one could call it karmic retribution for what they're doing here.
Rana Chawi joined them on their walk back to the city.
Soraka eyed the various trophies on his person.
Many of those metal tags make it to Korstorfi Keral.
He gestured at the ones draped over Rana Chawi's neck. The hibiscus glade had piles of them. Merchants there claimed that they're from powerful warriors. What metals were present? Copper, iron, and silver. That's what I thought, Rana Chawi said. I hope you didn't buy any thinking that they were special.
The humans with copper and iron plates aren't much stronger than the average human, while the ones with silver plates are about the same strength as our civilian migrants.
And what about the cloth badges? What do they represent? It's a different system, I think.
The humans with the badges are members of warbands. The ones with the metal plates are some sort of mercenary that operates in small packs.
The mercenaries are fine for raiding, but they're ineffective against what we're doing here. Mercenaries of that sort existed everywhere, and they usually did unsavory work.
Assassinations, kidnapping, theft, economic disruptions and active spying, anything that their employers wanted to avoid being implicated in.
The plates that you have are all pretty flashy, Soraka said.
Since they operate the way that they do, I guess that they're the type that use their strength to serve their own ends.
Their scum is what they are, Rana Chawi agreed in vehement tones. From what we've gathered, they only fight when they're offered sufficient pay.
Cities fall and millions of their people die,
yet they won't lift a claw to help without thinking they have something to gain from it.
Imagine tribal champions just watching their tribes die around them like these wretches. Pitiful. It's beyond pitiful. The Draconic Kingdom's warbands would have fared much better if those mercenaries didn't exist. Since those selfish assholes might just escape the country entirely, I go out of my way to kill them whenever I can. The world is better off without them.
At least those tags make it easy to single them out, Soraka said. What does each metal represent?
Were any a significant challenge?
Rana Chawi pointed at one of the gold tags around his neck. Gold is just above silver, he said. They're about as strong as a warrior that has survived 2 seasons of fighting on the frontier. Platinum is next, then mithril. Those are about as strong as our veteran warriors.
Magic casters with platinum and mithril plates often use 3rd-tier magic.
So they're from a variety of different castes?
Yeah. There are all sorts in the mix. The civilians always go after them because they want the prestige of taking down someone strong, but, half of the time, the scrawny-looking human that they single out melts them with a stream of acid. It can be pure chaos out there.
How high does the human's magic go?
I'm no expert in magic, but any casters with this orichalcum tag can use tier 4 spells according to our mystics.
So adamantite is the strongest.
Yep, Rana Chawi absently fiddled with a single adamantite tag around his neck. This scumbag was probably a bit stronger than I am, but we still got him and his pack. If humans bearing adamantite tags were stronger than Rana Chawi, their magic casters could probably access magic of the 5th tier. Since the invasion hadn't been thwarted by 6th or 7th tier spells, they probably didn't use ritual magic. They all had the same plates?
Soraka asked.
Yeah, Rana Chawi nodded.
6 of them. They had a few other packs with them that had lower plates, as well. We had to get all the Ronosan champions together to deal with them.
Do you know their names?
No idea. Only that they were pests.
Since they fight in those small packs, they can show up anywhere with no warning. Thousands of migrants died whenever that happened. Mitra here has a skill that can translate the writing on those metal plates, Soraka said. Would you mind if she takes a look?
I don't mind. Let's hear what the name of this filth was.
Rana Chawi removed the adamantite tag from around his neck and handed it over to Mitra. The Sharon whispered out a spell song. Cerebrate Fierce Flash, Crystal Tear, Oraculon, Paladin. Crystal Tear, a rumbling growl filled Rana Chawi's throat. Those scum claim to be followers of Vila?
Well, that makes me extra happy we put him down.
As he had come to pick up the con migrants redirected by the officials at the city docks, Rana Chawi parted ways with them before they reached the city. Soraka watched as the con lord and his subordinates jogged off towards the camp outside of the walls.
I don't believe any clans in Rolengork have different races under them, he said.
How did Rana Chawi end up under Clan Torika? Or is he some sort of temporary help like the fellows from Clan Kira that you mentioned? We went all over Rolengork searching for lords and champions willing to help in our cause, KHHSCHLR replied. I'm not sure how much of our home you've seen, but things are getting very tight. There were plenty of small tribes and clans with strong leaders willing to join the migration. It freed up space in the jungle and helped us with the conquest. So they use the same system of governance as before?
Broadly speaking,
yes. Each warrior tribe under Clan Torika has a set of civilian tribes under them. All of the ones that volunteered to join us have already been allocated their territories. Speaking of the civilian tribes, Soraka said, each of those human villages manages roughly 10 square kilometers of land. If each tribe is granted 100 square kilometers of land, that would mean the vast majority of the people migrating here won't have any territory waiting for them. They're migrants, KHHSCHLR replied. They just need to keep migrating. But they're still coming right now. They can't migrate into the water. That can't be helped. The migrants arriving in Eastwatch today decided to come here months ago. Besides, the Maharana would not be so limited in his scope. We already have a plan in action to address the issue.
Explain.
You've seen the ships, yes? Moored all along the river past Eastwatch. You mean to say that you're preparing to sail further west?
Indeed.
Do you know what's there? Our hunters have identified a strait where we can make the crossing in an hour. According to the aquatic demi-humans that reside off the coast, it is another human country, a horrible country that wages indiscriminate war with all of its non-human neighbors. Fanatics who worship gods that demand the extermination of all non-humans. All agree that the world would be a much better place without them, and we are only too happy to oblige. KHHSCHLR stopped and turned to face them with a feverish glint in her eye. I am not religious by any stretch of the imagination, but this can only be providence, yes? Our people are destined to tame this savage frontier. 8th day, lower water month, 0 CE, Rana Maharana Drathashur is amazing. Great, even Shork's calling him that now. Is he? Soraka asked. The young Osalo looked up at him, nose and whiskers twitching slightly. He's not? After taking a look at all of the markets and speaking to the new residents around Corin, that was what Mitra said the signs called the city, at least, for a couple of days, Soraka decided to head further downriver. According to KHHSCHLR, the closer to recently conquered lands they got, the less organized Clan Torika's occupation became. With the state of the local humans as miserable as it was, he could only keep going in hopes that he would find ones in a more regular state.
Their river barge drifted down the Rolengork at a leisurely pace, surrounded by the deceptively idyllic, to some races, at least, scenery of the occupied human nation.
Well, Soraka asked, what makes him so amazing, in your opinion?
He conquered so much new territory for everyone. Shork counted off the pink pads of her right paw. Everyone seems to respect him and he has Ranos of every race under his banner. He's pretty much conquered the Draconic Kingdom, but he's still preparing for another conquest. We're getting stronger all because of Maharana Dratha. To the people of Rolengork, it must have seemed that way. If they were lucky, it would work out the way that they hoped. Their problem now, however, lay not in the conquered states or any small countries that lay in their path. It was in whether their actions would upset the regional powers. Yet, recognition of that problem was entirely absent in the ranks of Clan Torika. One might speculate that it was some form of victory disease from their smooth and successful conquest of the Draconic Kingdom, but if Ranadratha was truly a warmaster, he should have been essentially immune to its effects. Another plausible line of thought was that, as with the rest of Rolengork's population, Clan Torika was simply ignorant of the world beyond their jungle. Either way, the seemingly heedless decision to extend their conquest was further indication that the Warmaster was no Warmaster at all, and any early indications that he was merely happenstance. Not that I expected there to be a Warmaster here in the first place. Then again, he might have just gotten carried away with his speculations, seeing things that weren't actually there. Warmaster may have simply been a title used by people who had no idea what it was, much like so many other things. You don't think the same, do you? Shork asked him. The answer is more complicated than I can easily convey, Soraka replied. Tell me, is there anything you don't like about how things are being handled here? Anything that you think you can do better? Me? The Ocelo's eyes widened. No way. I'm just a nobody. How could I come up with anything better? He's a Warmaster and he has a guru and all those strong Ronos under him. That doesn't mean you can't have your own thoughts about what's going on, Soraka told her. Consider it a part of your instruction. Shork fell deep into thought, staring past the starboard railing of their barge. As with the rest of the Rolengork, the settlements along the shores were cleared of humans and groups of migrants followed the road west. All of the migrants they had spoken to were completely oblivious to the fact that the conquest of the Draconic Kingdom was almost complete and they would continue their migration beyond where they expected it to end. I don't like that there's not enough land for the migrants, Shork said, but that can't be helped, right? They thought the fighting would be harder, so they ended up with more people than they needed. They can't just tell them to go home. That's true, Soraka replied. But just because something unexpected happens doesn't mean that you're absolved of all responsibility. As a lord, you must lead to the best of your ability no matter what happens. Then, why are they obsessed with raising humans as livestock? Wow, right to the main problem. As you say, it appears to be some sort of obsession. It could also be something they decided was a good idea in advance and they've invested themselves into seeing it through. What would you do in their stead? Raise better livestock. They said that it's best to slaughter humans before the age of 30. That's a long time. Even if they take care of themselves, they're still taking up land. Nug are slaughtered after a year and they yield 10 times the meat. What if Nug can't be raised in this environment? The humans have animals too. Or used to. You could smell where they used to keep them. They should be worth raising if the humans are raising them for the same reason. Humans eat meat, right? They can survive on a mix of things, Soraka replied, including meat. He breathed an internal sigh of relief. At least the type of thinking harbored by Clan Torika and the migrants to the Draconic Kingdom didn't appear to be natural for the people of Rolengork as a whole. Or maybe Shork followed different lines of thought because she had grown up in Klausdorfi Keral. The primitive tribal societies of many races raided their neighbors to secure resources in times of scarcity. It wouldn't be unfair to say that raiding behavior was one of the pillars of culture that evolved as a civilization did. The thing was that raiding usually didn't evolve into more raiding after a certain point. It tended to just become working. Raiding was essentially importing resources from outside of one's territory through forceful means. When new territories were acquired, one usually did not go from raiding the neighbors to ranching the neighbors because they were no longer neighbors consuming externally sourced resources.
They were taking up internal resources that could be more efficiently utilized doing other things, making them go from assets to liabilities depending on how they were employed.
Then why didn't you tell them that what they were doing was wrong? Shulk said, you didn't like it, right? I thought you would get angry. I mean, you didn't look mad, but I could tell you were mad. Mad without getting mad.
When did this girl become so attentive to you?
Soraka winced as Mitra's claws dug into his right arm. Why was he always the one getting hurt when others were the source of her jealousy? First of all, Soraka replied, my job out here doesn't involve telling people what to do unless I see that it's to my government's advantage somehow. That includes the instruction that you've been receiving. Secondly, they wouldn't listen anyway. They wouldn't? But that guru knows where you're from. They're heavily invested in their work, Soraka said. It's something that they've been planning for decades to accomplish. Furthermore, it's an achievement, one that they've spilt blood over. Dissuading them from their path would be an exercise in futility. They have to come to their own realizations. As for getting angry, that would be hypocritical of me and perhaps harmful to them. Why? He looked out over the carefully cultivated landscape of the Draconic Kingdom, trying to imagine what Clan Torika's conquest had been like. It was often said that history repeated itself, and Soraka would be hard-pressed to deny the assertion. The Beastman Confederacy is very old by the standards of most civilizations on the continent. We've done many things over the course of our development, and we rarely came up with the right answers the moment we decided to do something or were faced with a problem. So you did human ranching as well? Among other things, Soraka replied. History is never only filled with things that one can be proud of, but learning from our mistakes is often more important than being told the right answers. If one never learns from their mistakes, they are doomed to repeat them, and if one is afraid to make mistakes, one will eventually get stuck. The mistakes that countries make have far greater consequences than personal ones, which is why countries are better off making those mistakes early on. Some mistakes can just kill you, Shulk said. You'll never get a chance to learn from those. That's true as well, he admitted. But mistakes that can destroy a country are usually part of a long line of mistakes. There are also mistakes such as getting on the bad side of ancient dragons and the like, but I think most races have a natural aversion to angering entities of that caliber. They cease to exist otherwise. Then, are these humans making a mistake as well? One that they have to learn from? We still know very little about the humans living in this part of the world, Soraka said. Beyond that, there is never only one answer to a problem, and an answer that serves in one situation may not in another. That's why my instruction is so vague. I can only guide you to an answer that works for you and your people, and coming to your own realizations will help you face future problems. Their next stop along the Rolengork was a city that looked slightly smaller than Corin. A few kilometers from its walls, a bar official waved wildly at them from the northern shore. He shouted out to them as they drew close. Don't bring your ship any further than this. Did something happen? Davy asked. It's the end of the land managed by Clan Torika, the official answered. Past this point, migrants are responsible for their own security. Most boats going past the next city don't survive, so it's strongly suggested that you go by land from here. They don't survive? Soraka furrowed his brow. Do you mean they get attacked by humans? Or is there a territorial tribe living in the water? It's the humans. We can thrash them on land, but fighting them on the water is something else. Well, it's not so much fighting as them ramming their ships into ours. It's a waste of 2 good ships. Oh, if you're leaving that boat for good, Clan Torika will purchase it from you. They moored their vessel under a willow tree that dangled over the water. The official gave Soraka and his entourage an appraising look. You're a bit over-equipped for the Draconic Kingdom, he said. We didn't know what to expect, Davy said. The criers up river talk about land and opportunity, but little about what it costs to obtain. That's fair, I guess. Since you've gone to all that trouble to prepare, I'll do you a favor and let you in on something. What's that? The official leaned forward with a conspiratory air. The Draconic Kingdom isn't the end of our migration, he said in a low voice. We're going to take the human lands on the other side of the water, as well. Once the monsoon season is over, we'll make the crossing. The other migrants don't know about this. Clan Torika will let them know soon enough. For now, we've spread them out so they can feed on the humans while they wait. Otherwise,
They'd be crowding the shores to be the first ones across. Some idiots may even try to make the crossing on their own, and that'd warn the humans on the other side.
I see. In that case, we'll keep the information to ourselves. Thank you for letting us know.
Even when they try to be helpful, they're presumptuous. We didn't even say that we were migrants. It was another symptom of the so-called victory disease he had noted since entering the Draconic Kingdom. The fruits of victory were tumbling into their paws too quickly, and a collective sense of power, control and destiny had fallen over the conquerors. Their words and actions were heedless and only saw their version of reality. Looks like we're finally getting somewhere, Jericho said. Soraka focused his gaze on the city skyline ahead.
What do you mean?
That city still has humans living in it, the Inquisitor replied. There's too much smoke for it to be these local beastmen.
Then where are the beastmen?
There are a bunch running security on the city walls, Jericho said.
Pretty sure everyone else is spread out like that pompous official said.
Are we going in?
Davy asked.
This is exactly what we're here for, Soraka answered.
It's more than we hoped for, even.
The entrance of River Garden lay wide open, or rather, it had been broken open. Pieces of gate and portcullis lay scattered outside the walls. A few dozen humans were active just inside, but they scattered at his entourage's approach.
How do we begin?
There was no reason for the humans to assume that they were anyone other than the beastmen that were taking over their territory. Some things, however, didn't require the cooperation of the locals. What do you think, Davy? Assuming these humans were subjected to the same calamity that befell Roland Gork, his first wife said, they've recovered remarkably quickly. It's nothing one would expect of a human nation this far from the centers of civilization. Did they receive support, or is it simply the result of trade? I couldn't say until we have a better idea of the region. Jericho, Soraka said. See if you can't acquire a map from the locals.
Sure thing.
The Inquisitor entered a nearby alley and vanished. Mitra concealed herself as Soraka made his way further into the city. The Sharon went ahead of them, peeking into the doors and windows of the buildings. She returned to his side when they reached the central plaza.
It's quiet, she said,
but the workshops are still running, making what necessities they're allowed to. The people here are hiding a lot of things from casual observation, though. I wonder how many beastmen get stabbed here, Jericho said as he appeared beside him. I got your map.
Where did you find it? An abandoned estate.
The conquerors took all the shinies away, but they left a lot of other goodies behind. After Soraka received the map, the Inquisitor produced several more articles. He held up a roll of vellum towards Mitra.
Check this out.
Mitra's lips moved silently before she described the content aloud. This is a futures contract for 20,000 barrels of wine. Delivery is due on. It looks like they use a run-of-the-mill elemental calendar, but I'm not sure how their dates line up with ours. They're in the northern hemisphere, so it should be upside down? Davy leaned in to examine the parchment. It's not in the script used by merchants along the Sapphire Coast, she said, but the format is the same. How much more of this was there in that estate?
Who knows, Jericho replied. It was all over the floor.
The merchant's mouth fell open in horror. Roland Gork's victorious migrants had no idea that they had probably left tens of thousands of platinum trade coins on the floor, instead taking whatever pieces of art and metalwork they thought had value. The contracts had no intrinsic value on their own, so their merchants wouldn't be able to discern their worth. Well, it's not as if the parties involved can complete the transaction now, Mitra said with a shrug. Gimme that map, G. Soraka placed the map into Mitra's grasping claws. Her eyes hungrily devoured the details inked upon it. Slain Theocracy, Kingdom of Reistais, Baharuth Empire, City-State Alliance of Carnassus. Oh, there's the Great Northern Steppe. Did you see any Minotaur technology while you were in there? Soraka asked.
I did, actually, Jericho replied. They had a few fridges and freezers on the lowest floor.
The things looked pretty out of place, so they were probably imported. Still, it confirmed trade links with the Minos League, and if there were trade links, there would also be intelligence agents. How safe would it be to head north? The presence of Confederacy delegates would likely spur the League's expeditionary vanguard to drastically step up their operations in the region, and the Confederacy wasn't ready to keep them in check. What are the distances marked on the map?
MMH. Mitra tilted her head sideways. It's a merchant map, so it only shows route distances. Let's see, the lake between the Draconic Kingdom and the slain theocracy is 100 kilometers across at the most. There's no direct route to the Baharuth Empire from the Draconic Kingdom. The only way north is from the theocracy, going up this highway 200 kilometers to a city called Erantal in the Kingdom of Reastais. Mitra wandered over to a nearby bench in the plaza, placing the map upon it. Everyone gathered around. The highway splits there. She traced a road on the map with a claw, going east to the Baharuth Empire, the City-State Alliance and eventually to the Great Northern Steppe. It goes west through Reastais to this Holy Kingdom of Roble in the southwest and the Argland Confederation in the northwest. There's a lot of stuff on this map, but it's pretty small. Assuming these maritime routes mark the coastline accurately, it looks like you can squish everything west of the City-State Alliance into Rolengork. Did that mean Clan Torika's ambitions were actually feasible? If the region was broken up into many small states, they could each potentially be crushed by the weight of Rolengork's migrants alone. Does it say anything about the races that live in the region? No. Assuming that KHHSCHLR is correct about the slain theocracy, the fact that it has a trade route running north means that the Kingdom of Reastais is probably a human state. Humans being humans, I wouldn't be surprised if this region was all human. Don't forget about what KHHSCHLR said about the Draconic Kingdom's northern border, Karawaki said. The persistent negative energy zone, huh? Soraka's eyes went to the blank space on the map that the trade routes circumvented. Wait, isn't this too big? I wouldn't be surprised if Death Knights and Solitas popped out of there. They're humans, Jirika said offhandedly. I bet you they're dumping. Faces around the bench twisted in disgust. You can't be serious, Karawaki said. If they want to commit mass suicide, they can do it without involving everyone else. Negative energy dumping was a practice that was considered taboo around the world. Civilizations that cared little for the world beyond themselves would designate areas to settle their disputes through warfare, effectively dumping negative energy. To them, negative energy zones were simply a convenience. They didn't know or care that they were contributing to the growth of an unnatural blight. Countries caught dumping negative energy were censured by the international community. If they persisted, they would be destroyed before their actions put the entire region at risk. Removing a negative energy zone once it became persistent was an expensive and time-consuming effort. Looking at it from another angle, Soraka said, it also means that the countries surrounding this negative energy zone have the means to destroy whatever comes out of it, or maybe they don't. Make up your damn mind, Jariku said. What the hell does that last part mean? Ranadrith expected more substantial resistance from the Draconic Kingdom, Soraka replied. Since they didn't encounter it, I was thinking that it had been coincidentally lost in a conflict with another country. But with this negative energy zone being as large as it is, they may have been lost fighting something powerful that spawned there. These guys are in for a nice surprise if that's the case. There's no sense of alarm from the Draconic Kingdom's humans related to anything like that, Soraka said, so a coalition of surrounding states may have taken care of the problem. At least I hope so. Shouldn't you let Clan Torika know about this? Shork asked. The undead are everyone's enemy. It's a speculative warning at best, but we'll let KHHSCHLR know on the way back through Corin. The migrants are decentralized past this point, so anything insubstantial won't get anywhere. Mitra packed away the map and Soraka looked around the plaza. Unfortunately, the humans there had vacated the area so there was no one to speak to. A city center should have some offices, he said. Does anyone see anything familiar? There's a merchant guild office over there, Davy pointed to the western end of the plaza. Would you like me to take a look? Actually, I needed a place to deposit everything I made from Rolengork. Do you really think they'll take your deposit? Why not? The merchant guild is the merchant guild. They silently followed Davy across the plaza, leaving most of the house guard at the bottom of the office's front stairs. Soraka and Mitra ducked to fit under the doorframe as they made their way inside. The building's occupants scattered at their entry. Undaunted, Davy walked up to the reception counter, ringing the service bell. Shork jumped at the sound. What does that do? She asked. It summons a friendly clerk from the Merchant Guild, Davy said in a slightly loud voice.
The Merchant Guild is an international organization that facilitates the business of its hundreds of millions of members. The sailor's eyes grew wide. Hundreds of, is the world being taken over by merchants?
That's right, Davy answered with a nod. Merchants make the world go round.
While that last part might be metaphorically true, Soraka said, they're only a small percentage of the world's population.
Davy rang the bell again.
Frantic whispering rose from deeper within the office, followed by a resigned sigh. A balding human in a familiar uniform rose from behind a desk, walking up on unsteady steps. The old and infirm sacrificing themselves, Jiraka said, karma ratings are through the roof.
We're not here to eat them.
Davy shot the Inquisitor a sidelong glance. I'm here to make a deposit. Davy produced heavy sacks of precious metals and gems, lining them up on the counter. The old clerk's gaze crossed over them. He swallowed. The Merchant Guild reserves the right to refuse deposits of illegally acquired assets.
They're not illegal.
Davy growled. I spent the last 2 months trading the length and breadth of Rolengork for this. They're not familiar with the organization, so there was nowhere to deposit my earnings. She fished out her account book and placed it on the counter, tapping it with a claw. I'm an upstanding member of the guild. You can't refuse me service. The clerk hesitantly reached out to take the account book. His eyes widened as he leafed through the pages. It was no small wonder, Davy was probably wealthy enough to buy the entire Draconic Kingdom, before it had been invaded, outright.
Where did you last update this? He asked.
Stormport. Please bear with us. After the clerk turned and disappeared into the office, Soraka let out a snort. I can't believe that worked. Of course it worked, Davy furrowed her brow at him. But the deposit won't go through.
Why not?
Those merchants that scattered, Jiraka said. They're all using paper. So it's not safe to hold physical assets because the new management is stealing them.
Something like that.
Savages, Davy muttered. Never mind any regional threats, when the guild hears about this, they'll obliterate Rolengork. They're merchants, right? Shork tucked her tail between her legs. Don't look down on merchants, Davy told her. Snuffing out lawless savages is all in a day's work for those who maintain the financial and economic systems of the world.
So we're doomed, Shork's whiskers drooped.
It's something that would happen in stages, Mitra said. First, they'll contain Rolengork, then engineer the downfall of the ruling castes. After that, they'll replace them with new overlords that will enforce civilized conduct upon the native population. The Sharon's dramatic voice rose with every sentence, and she lifted her paws in a grandiose way at the last. Shork visibly wilted, cringing behind Soraka. Stop scaring the poor girl, he said. You think they wouldn't finance a punitive expedition? Davy said. Hardly anyone would care about a country beyond the edge of nowhere being crushed. Especially one that crossed the Merchant Guild. The clerk returned with a binder in hand. As the Merchant Guild was an international organization, it faced certain challenges from region to region. While the format of their documentation was standardized and numbers were easily decipherable, language barriers posed a problem and the guild had developed protocols for dealing with them. We've recognized your membership with the guild, the clerk said, but we can't take your deposit. Nothing against you in particular, of course, it's just that the occupying forces have no respect for private property. Our branch was ransacked shortly after Rivergarden fell, so we can't guarantee the security of your deposits. I see, Davy sighed. Well, it was worth the attempt. I'll just have to carry this all around until I return to the Sapphire Coast. Since you'll be headed that way, the clerk produced a sealed envelope. Would you be so kind as to deliver this to the Stormport branch? It would be my pleasure, Davy replied. Since we're here, could you answer some questions we have about the Draconic Kingdom? About its industrial and economic situation in particular. Before this invasion, of course. The clerk, now more visibly relaxed, leaned against the counter and nodded. Sure, why not, he said. Those other beastmen have been sizing us up recently, so I don't know how much time we have left. But we'll have to entertain you in the back. Can't have what little business that remains frightened off.